The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. It was the kind of place where the linoleum had cracks older than the regulars, and the neon sign out front buzzed like a dying bee. Lucas wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, his hands raw from the bleach water. His shift had started at 6 in the morning, and it was now pushing 11 at night. 17 hours. His back ached. His feet throbbed. But he couldn't afford to complain. He couldn't afford much of anything anymore. In the corner booth sat a man in a suit that probably cost more than Lucas made in 3 months. Dark navy fabric, crisp white shirt, gold cufflinks that caught the light every time he moved. He'd been sitting there for over an hour, barely touching his food, just staring at his phone, occasionally sipping his black coffee. Lucas had refilled it twice without being asked. The man never looked up, never said thank you, just kept scrolling, his face carved from stone. Lucas glanced at the clock. His daughter Emma would be asleep by now. Mrs. Chun from upstairs was watching her again. She never asked for payment, but Lucas always left what he could on her kitchen table. $20 here, $15 there. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Emma was 7 years old and still sleeping in the same bed as him because their apartment only had 1 bedroom. She deserved more. She deserved a father who could afford to buy her new shoes instead of waiting for the thrift store to restock. She deserved a life that didn't revolve around whether or not Daddy got enough tips that week. The man in the suit finally stood. He didn't stretch, didn't yawn, just rose like he'd been on a business call the whole time. He pulled out a leather wallet, the kind with a designer logo stamped into the corner, and dropped a black credit card on the table. Lucas walked over, wiping his hands on his apron. "I'll take that whenever you're ready, sir." The man didn't respond. He was already typing on his phone again. Lucas picked up the card and the receipt, walking it over to the register. $47. Not a huge check, but decent for one person. He ran the card, printed the receipt, and brought it back with a pen. The man signed without looking, then slid the receipt back across the table. Lucas picked it up, glanced down, and felt his stomach drop. $0. 0 cents. No tip. He stared at the line where the tip should have been. Just a long, deliberate 0. Not even a dash. Not even blank. A 0. Written clearly. Intentionally. Lucas stood there for a moment, the receipt trembling slightly in his hand. He wanted to say something. Wanted to ask if there had been a problem with the service. But he didn't. He just swallowed the words, folded the receipt, and tucked it into his apron pocket. The man in the suit walked out without a word. The door chimed as it swung shut behind him. Lucas stood at the empty booth, staring at the plate of half-eaten steak, the untouched fries, the coffee cup still warm. He began clearing the table, stacking the plates with mechanical precision. It wasn't the first time someone had stiffed him. Probably wouldn't be the last. But something about tonight felt heavier. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the overdue electric bill sitting on his kitchen counter. Maybe it was the way Emma had asked him that morning if they could go to the zoo someday, and he'd had to tell her maybe next year. He wiped down the table, sprayed it with cleaner, wiped it again. As he lifted the napkin holder, something fluttered to the floor. Piece of paper. Small, folded twice. Lucas bent down and picked it up. It wasn't a napkin. It was a note, handwritten. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the words. "I know who you are. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Corner of 5th and Main. Don't tell anyone. This changes everything." Lucas read it twice, then a third time. His heart was pounding now, a dull thud in his chest. He flipped the paper over. Nothing else. No name. No signature. Just those words. He looked around the diner, suddenly aware of how empty it was. Just him and the cook in the back. The street outside was dark. The man in the suit was long gone. What did this mean? Who was he? And how did he know Lucas? Lucas folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, next to the receipt with the $0 tip. His hands were shaking. He finished his shift on autopilot, mopping the floors, shutting off the lights, locking the door behind him. The walk home took 20 minutes. He didn't have a car. Couldn't afford one. The bus didn't run this late. So he walked, hands shoved deep in his pockets, the note burning a hole through the fabric. The city at night had a strange quality to it. During the day, it was all noise and movement, people rushing from one place to another like they were being chased. But at night, especially this late, it became something else. The streets were quieter, almost contemplative. The occasional taxi passed by, its yellow paint gleaming under the streetlights. A homeless man sat outside the convenience store, his cardboard sign leaning against his knee. Lucas had walked past him 100 times. Tonight, he stopped and pulled out $2 from his pocket. It was all he had left until payday. The man looked up, surprised, and nodded his thanks. Lucas nodded back and kept walking. He thought about the note with every step. The handwriting had been careful, deliberate, not scrawled in a hurry. Someone had taken time with those words. Someone who knew something about him. But what? Lucas wasn't important. He wasn't connected to anything or anyone significant. He was just a guy trying to keep his head above water, trying to make sure his daughter had food on the table and a roof over her head. When he finally climbed the stairs to his apartment, he could hear the faint hum of the television through the door. Mrs. Chun was still awake, knitting on the couch. Emma was curled up beside her, her small body rising and falling with each breath. Lucas smiled despite everything. That was all that mattered. Her. Safe. Warm. Loved. Mrs. Chun looked up as he entered. She was a woman in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She'd lived in the building longer than anyone could remember. When Lucas's wife had left 3 years ago, disappeared in the middle of the night without even a note, Mrs. Chun had been the one to knock on his door the next morning with a casserole and an offer to help with Emma whenever he needed it. He tried to refuse at first, tried to insist he could manage on his own. But Mrs. Chun had a way of seeing through pride. She gathered her knitting now, patted his arm, and left without a word. Lucas locked the door behind her, then scooped Emma into his arms. She stirred but didn't wake. He carried her to the bed, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. For a moment, he just watched her sleep. Her face was so peaceful, so innocent. She didn't know about the bills, the debt, the fear that kept him awake most nights. And he'd do everything in his power to keep it that way. Emma had her mother's dark hair and his green eyes. She was small for her age, something the school nurse had mentioned at the last checkup, suggesting more protein in her diet. Lucas had nodded and said he'd work on it, knowing full well that protein cost money he didn't always have. Sometimes they ate pasta 4 nights a week. Sometimes breakfast was cereal and dinner was peanut butter sandwiches. He did the best he could, but his best never felt like enough. Lucas sat down at the tiny kitchen table, pulling the note from his pocket. He read it again under the dim light. I know who you are. What did that mean? He wasn't anyone special. Just a single dad trying to survive. He'd never done anything remarkable. Never been in the news. Never crossed paths with anyone like that man in the suit. So why did he feel like the ground had just shifted beneath him? He thought about ignoring it, throwing the note away and pretending it never happened. But something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the $0 tip that still stung like a slap. Whatever it was, Lucas knew he'd be standing on that corner tomorrow at noon. He opened the folder on the table where he kept all the bills. Electric, water, rent, credit card statements from the hospital when Emma had pneumonia 2 years ago. He was still paying those off, $25 a month, watching the balance shrink by painfully small increments. The rent was due in 5 days. He had enough to cover it barely, but that would leave almost nothing for groceries. He'd figure it out. He always did. Even if it meant skipping meals himself to make sure Emma ate. If you've ever felt like you're one bad day away from everything falling apart, drop a comment. Sometimes just knowing others understand makes the weight a little lighter. He didn't sleep that night. Just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to Emma breathe. Her breathing had a slight whistle to it, something left over from the pneumonia. The doctor said it would go away eventually. Lucas hoped so. He listened to that whistle now, counting the seconds between each breath, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Tried not to think about what would happen if he got sick and couldn't work. Tried not to think about the note in his pocket and what meeting that man might mean. When the sun finally rose, he felt like he'd been awake for a week. He got Emma ready for school, moving through the morning routine with practiced efficiency. Cereal with a sliced banana, her favorite pink backpack, hair brushed and pulled into a ponytail. She chattered the whole time, telling him about a drawing she'd made in class, about a new friend named Sophie who had a puppy, about a book she wanted to read called Charlotte's Web. "Can we get it from the library, Daddy?" "Absolutely," Lucas said, and her face lit up. The library was free. Free was good. He walked her to the bus stop 3 blocks away, holding her hand the whole way. Other parents were there, some in business clothes heading off to office jobs, some in workout gear fresh from the gym. Lucas stood apart from them in his worn jeans and faded jacket, the smell of grease still clinging to him from last night. Emma didn't seem to notice. She hugged him tight before climbing onto the bus, her backpack almost as big as she was. "Love you, Daddy. Love you more, sweetheart." He watched the bus pull away, then checked his watch. 7:45. He had a few hours before he needed to be at 5th and Main. He should sleep, should rest before his shift tonight. But his mind wouldn't stop racing. Instead, he walked, just walked through the city, letting his feet carry him wherever they wanted to go. He passed the park where he used to take Emma when she was little, pushing her on the swings until his arms ached. He passed the grocery store where he carefully calculated every purchase, putting items back when the total got too high. He passed the apartment building where he'd lived with his wife before everything fell apart. They'd been happy once, or at least he'd thought so. But happiness was expensive, and when the money ran out, so did she. He'd come home from a double shift to find half the closet empty and a note on the kitchen table. Not even a real note, just 3 words. "I can't anymore." No explanation, no apology, no forwarding address. Just gone. Emma had been 4 years old. She still asked about her mother sometimes, and Lucas never knew what to say. How do you explain to a child that her mother chose to leave? That she decided being a parent was too hard? So he said things like, "Mommy had to go away, and she loved you very much," even though he wasn't sure either of those things were true. By 11:30, he was standing on the corner of 5th and Main. The city moved around him like a river. People rushed past, briefcases in hand, phones pressed to their ears. No one looked at him. No one ever did. He was invisible, just another face in the crowd. He checked his watch. 11:45. His palms were sweating. He wiped them on his jeans. The minutes crawled by. 11:50. 11:55. Lucas started to wonder if this was some kind of joke. Maybe the man wouldn't show. Maybe this whole thing was just some cruel prank, and he'd been stupid enough to fall for it. He should leave. Should go home and try to get a few hours of sleep before his shift started at 6. But he stayed. Something kept his feet planted on that corner. At exactly noon, a black car pulled up to the curb. Sleek, expensive, the kind of car that probably cost more than Lucas would make in 10 years. The back window rolled down, and there he was. The man from the diner. Same suit. Same cold expression. He didn't smile. Didn't nod. Just looked at Lucas like he was examining a piece of furniture. "Get in." Lucas hesitated. Every instinct told him to walk away, to turn around and go back to his life, however broken it was. But he didn't. He opened the door and slid into the leather seat. The interior smelled like expensive cologne and new car. The door closed behind him with a heavy thunk. The car pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into traffic. "You came," the man said. His voice was deep, measured. Not unkind, but not warm either. "You didn't give me much choice," Lucas replied. "That note. What is this?" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Thick, leather-bound, the kind lawyers carried. He placed it on the seat between them. Lucas stared at it like it might bite him. "Open it." Lucas picked up the folder, his hands unsteady. Inside were documents, legal papers, a photograph, He pulled out the photo first. It was old, faded at the edges, the colors slightly washed out the way old photographs get. Two men standing side by side, arms around each other's shoulders. They looked young, maybe early 20s. They were standing in front of a house. A nice house with a wide porch and a green lawn. Both men were smiling, genuinely smiling, the kind of smile that comes from being truly happy. They looked alike. Same build, same jawline, same eyes. One of them Lucas didn't recognize. The other, Lucas felt the air leave his lungs. "That's my father," he whispered. The man nodded. "And mine." Lucas looked up, his mind racing, trying to piece together something that didn't make sense. "What are you talking about? My father died when I was 2. I don't even remember him. I don't have any pictures. My mom never talked about him." "Your father and my father were brothers," the man said. "Which makes you my cousin. My name is Marcus, by the way. Marcus Brennan." Lucas shook his head. "No, that's not possible. I don't have any family. It's just me and Emma. My mom died when I was 19. There's no one else." "You didn't know because no one told you," Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. "Your father and mine had a falling out before you were born. Something about money, about the business my father wanted to build. Your father didn't want any part of it. He wanted a simpler life. They argued. Things were said. Terrible things, the kind of things you can't take back. They stopped speaking, cut each other off completely. My father built an empire. Yours chose a different path. They never spoke again. But blood is blood, Lucas. And my father never forgot that." Lucas stared at the documents. Birth certificates. A will. Legal declarations. His name was on some of them. His father's name on others. Michael Harrison. That had been his father's name. Lucas had only known that from his own birth certificate, which listed Michael Harrison as his father and then, in cold bureaucratic language, noted that he was deceased. "My father passed away 3 months ago," Marcus continued. "Cancer. He fought it for 2 years, but in the end, it didn't matter how much money he had. He couldn't buy his way out of it. Before he died, he made me promise something. He said there was a man out there, a son of his brother, who deserved more than the hand life had dealt him. He said if I ever found you, I was to make sure you were taken care of. He'd spent years trying to track you down, but it wasn't until after he got sick that he finally hired someone to really dig. That's when they found you. Single father, working multiple jobs, barely surviving. So I found you." Lucas felt like he was drowning, like the car was filling with water and he couldn't breathe. "The diner, last night, that was you testing me?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "I needed to see what kind of man you were, if you had integrity, if you had character. My father's will was very specific. The inheritance was to go to you only if you proved yourself worthy. Not worthy of the money, but worthy of the name, of the family. I could have just handed you a check, but that wouldn't have told me anything. So I watched you. For 3 weeks, actually. I came to that diner 6 times. Different days, different times. I watched how you treated people, how you worked, how you carried yourself. And last night, I needed one final test. So you humiliated me to see if I'd pass some kind of test?" Lucas's voice cracked. He wasn't sure if he was angry or just overwhelmed. Maybe both. If this is stirring something in you, if you're feeling what Lucas is feeling right now, let me know with a like. These moments matter. "I had to know if you were worth it," Marcus said simply. "I left you nothing and watched how you responded. You didn't yell, didn't make a scene, didn't follow me out demanding an explanation. You didn't even talk badly about me to the cook when you went back to the kitchen. I know because I had someone listening. You just kept working, kept your head down and did your job. That told me everything I needed to know. You have dignity. You have pride, but not the kind that makes you lash out when you're hurt. That's rare, especially in someone who has every reason to be bitter." Lucas didn't know what to say. He felt stripped bare, like every private moment of his life had been observed and catalogued. "You had no right." "You're right," Marcus said. "I didn't, but I had a responsibility. To my father, to his last wish. And now I have one to you. He reached into the folder and pulled out a check. He handed it to Lucas. The check was printed on heavy paper, the kind that felt substantial in your hand. Lucas looked at the number, then looked again, then had to count the zeros because his mind couldn't process it. 7 figures. More money than he'd make in multiple lifetimes. This is your inheritance, Marcus said. It's what my father wanted you to have. Enough to change your life. Enough to give your daughter everything she deserves. Enough to make sure you never have to work another 17-hour shift at a diner just to keep the lights on. Lucas couldn't speak. He just sat there, holding the check, his hands trembling. The numbers swam in his vision. He thought about Emma, about the zoo she wanted to visit, about new shoes that actually fit, about a bed of her own, about not having to choose between paying rent and buying groceries, about college someday without crushing debt, about a life where he didn't have to say no to every single thing she wanted because he couldn't afford it. Tears slid down his face before he could stop them. He tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming. His shoulders shook. All the exhaustion, all the fear, all the years of barely holding it together came pouring out. And Marcus just sat there, not saying anything, just letting him break down in the back of his expensive car. When Lucas finally got control of himself, he looked at Marcus. Why now? Why wait until last night? If you'd been watching me for 3 weeks, you already knew what kind of person I was. Because I needed to find you first. And I needed to know you were real, Marcus said. My father spent his whole life regretting that fight with your father. He built everything, but it was hollow. He told me that once, near the end. Said he'd trade every dollar he ever made to take back the things he said to his brother. To have one more conversation. But your father died young in an accident, and my father never got the chance to make it right. So he left that responsibility to me. I'm just keeping my promise. Lucas looked down at the check again. Felt impossible. Like something from a dream. What do I have to do? Marcus shook his head. Nothing. This isn't a contract. There are no strings. It's yours. My father wanted you to have it, and so do I. Though I will say one thing. Don't waste it. Don't throw it away on things that don't matter. Use it to build something. For yourself. For Emma. That's all he would have wanted. The car pulled up in front of Lucas's building. The contrast was jarring. The sleek black luxury vehicle parked outside the crumbling brick building with its rusted fire escape and broken front step. Marcus looked at him one last time. You have a second chance, Lucas. Don't waste it. Lucas stepped out of the car, the folder clutched to his chest. The door closed behind him, and the car disappeared into the city. He stood there on the sidewalk, the world spinning around him, and for the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. He walked up the stairs in a daze, unlocked his apartment door, and sat down at the kitchen table. The check was still in his hand. He spread the documents out in front of him, reading through them slowly. There was paperwork to sign, accounts to set up, lawyers to meet with. But it was all real. His father had a brother. That brother had built a fortune. And now some of that fortune was his. Lucas thought about his father, the man he'd never known. Michael Harrison. A man who'd chosen a simple life over wealth. Who'd walked away from money to follow his own path. Lucas had spent his whole life thinking he came from nothing, that he had no history, no roots. But he did. He came from someone who'd made a choice, who'd valued something more than money. And now, through some twist of fate, Lucas had a choice too. He looked around the apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the drafty windows, the refrigerator that hummed too loud. It wasn't much, but it was home. And soon it could be more. When Emma came home from school that afternoon, Lucas was waiting for her at the bus stop. She ran to him like she always did, backpack bouncing, ponytail swinging. Daddy, you're here. You're never here after school. He scooped her up and spun her around. Something he hadn't done in months because he'd been too tired. She laughed. And the sound was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. I wanted to tell you something, he said, setting her down and kneeling so they were eye level. Things are going to change for us. Good changes. We're going to be okay. She looked at him with those serious green eyes. "Are we going to the zoo?" He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to the zoo. And a lot of other places too." That night, Lucas sat Emma down at the kitchen table. He didn't tell her about the money, not exactly. She was too young to understand numbers that big. But he told her about family, about her grandfather and great-uncle, about roots she didn't know she had. She listened, her small face focused, and when he was done, she asked, "So we're not alone?" "No, baby," he said, his throat tight. "We're not alone." Over the following weeks, Lucas's life transformed in ways he never could have imagined. He met with lawyers who explained the inheritance in detail. He opened bank accounts. He gave notice at the diner, and his boss, a gruff man named Tony who'd never shown much emotion, actually looked sad to see him go. "You're one of the good ones," Tony said, shaking his hand. "Don't forget where you came from." Lucas promised he wouldn't. He found a new apartment. Nothing extravagant, but clean and safe, with 2 bedrooms so Emma could finally have her own space. She picked out paint colors for her room, pale purple with white trim, and Lucas spent an entire weekend painting while she supervised, pointing out spots he missed. He paid off every bill, every debt, the hospital, the credit cards, the electric company that had threatened to shut off his power more times than he could count. He walked into each place, wrote a check, and walked out feeling lighter. He set up a college fund for Emma, made investments that would ensure her future was secure no matter what happened. He even bought a car, nothing fancy, just reliable, so he didn't have to walk 20 minutes home from work anymore. Except he didn't have work to walk home from. That was still strange. But the strangest part was the hole it left. For years, his entire life had been about survival. Every decision, every action, every thought had been focused on making it to the next day. And now that pressure was gone. He didn't know what to do with himself. He felt untethered, like a balloon that had slipped its string. Marcus called him a month after their meeting. "How are you adjusting?" "Honestly, I don't know," Lucas said. "It's like I've been running for so long, and now I've stopped, but I don't remember how to just stand still." "That's normal," Marcus said. "When my father died, I felt the same way. Everything shifted, and I didn't know where I fit anymore. Give it time. Figure out what you want to do, not what you have to do. There's a difference." What did Lucas want to do? He'd never really thought about it. He'd been too busy trying to survive to dream. But now he had the luxury of choice. And choice was terrifying. He started volunteering at Emma's school, helped in the library, organized book fairs, chaperoned field trips. He met other parents, made friends, built a community he'd never had time for before. He took Emma to the zoo, just like he'd promised, and to the aquarium, and to museums and parks and every place she'd ever pointed to and asked about. He watched her bloom, saw her confidence grow. She joined a soccer team, something she'd wanted to do for years but they'd never been able to afford. She made friends easily, invited them over to their new apartment, and Lucas would make them snacks and listen to them giggle about whatever 7-year-olds giggle about. One evening, 6 months after the meeting with Marcus, Lucas sat on the couch while Emma did her homework at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the scratch of her pencil and the distant sound of traffic outside. He thought about that night at the diner. The man in the suit, the $0 tip, the note that had changed everything. He understood now why Marcus had done it. Not just to test him, but to see if he was someone who would do the right thing even when no one was watching. Even when he'd been humiliated. Even when he'd had every reason to be angry. Because integrity wasn't about how you acted when people were looking. It was about who you were in the dark, when no one would ever know. Lucas had passed a test he didn't know he was taking. And in doing so, he'd given Emma a future. But more than that, he'd proven something to himself. That he was worth more than the sum of his circumstances. That dignity and character mattered. That kindness, even in the face of cruelty, was never wasted. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Marcus's number. They texted occasionally over the months, brief check-ins, nothing deep. But tonight, Lucas wanted to say something. Thank you, not just for the money, for seeing me, for caring enough to find out who I was. Your father would be proud of you. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. He'd be proud of you too, and so would yours. Lucas looked at the photograph Marcus had given him, now framed and sitting on the bookshelf. His father and his uncle, arms around each other, smiling. Two brothers who'd loved each other once, before pride and anger tore them apart. But even that hadn't been the end. Love had found a way forward, through Marcus, through the inheritance, through a note left in a diner. Emma looked up from her homework. Daddy, can you help me with this math problem? Of course, Lucas said, setting his phone down and moving to sit beside her. As he helped her work through the problem, explaining each step patiently, he realized something. This was what wealth actually meant. Not the money in the bank or the car in the parking lot or the new apartment. It was time. Time to help with homework. Time to volunteer at school. Time to be present. Time to be the father he'd always wanted to be but had never had the space to become. The $0 tip had stung. It was meant to. But what had followed, that had been the real lesson. That sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most unexpected blessings. That family could find you even when you thought you were alone. That second chances were real, even if they came in the strangest ways. Lucas never forgot the man in the suit. Never forgot the $0 tip. But more than that, he never forgot the note. The one that changed everything. Not because of the words on it, but because of what those words had led to. Connection. A history. A future. And late at night, when Emma was asleep in her own room and the apartment was quiet, Lucas would sometimes pull out that note and read it again. I know who you are. Marcus had known. Or at least he'd wanted to find out. And in the process of testing Lucas, he'd given him something far more valuable than money. He'd given him back his story, his family, his father's memory. And most importantly, he'd shown Lucas that he was exactly the kind of man his father would have been proud of. Not because of what he had, but because of who he was. If you believe in second chances and the power of family, even the ones you never knew you had, subscribe. Because stories like this are why we keep going, why we stay kind even when the world isn't, and why we never stop believing that tomorrow might be the day everything changes. One small piece of paper, one moment of humiliation, one test of character, and everything changed. Sometimes that's all it takes.